University. Hope you have had a restful time so far. Calcutta is a difficult place to manage any rest. Right. The discussion that we have been given to believe is based on Indo-US cooperation and other facets that we moved in. It is basically an unstructured interaction that we are likely to have over here. Free-flowing, and yet we also know our limits and bounds where to keep it. And certainly, no politics is likely to be discussed over here, hopefully. Okay. And I believe you all have not had any military visits so far, but you have enough of military people around here to fill you in, should you desire anything of that matter. We have Mr. V.S. Bhandari sitting right in the center, with our president, and on either side are two vice presidents. And then all the names are there, and I believe you've already got the bios of everybody.
This is really about the students and about their discussion. They're all working, as you may or may not be aware, they're all working, they'll graduate in June, and they will have earned a master's degree. So as a function of that, they have to do a strategy research project. So that's what they're here. This is the field studies aspect of that. Their topics are varied, everything from disaster assistance and humanitarian relief to energy policies to all things China, as you would probably guess, especially with the military, on the military side. So with that being said, I think the best thing to do is we can go. Did you receive our bios? I know we sent them, but I'm not sure.
Yes,
Okay. All right. Okay. So I think the bigger thing we would do, I would say we should just move right into a question and answer session, and I would offer that let the students should start off with that because this is all about them. So with that being said, I don't know if anyone has anything else they already have on mind, but you have a free audience, and they're willing to tell you what you want to hear. So I would say take advantage of that.
Whether we like it or not, we have a lot of baggage to carry, both sides, from the Cold War days. And that goes way back to late 50s, 60s, where Pakistan allied to you, and we were believed to be allied to the Russians. So we saw you supporting indirectly our insurgency in the northeastern part of India, you meaning the United States, as also indirectly assisting Pakistan in its activities with J&K and fomenting trouble in other parts of India. And you were busy defeating the Soviets up in Afghanistan, and therefore indirectly assisting the Chinese also, because the Chinese were also aiding in that. Now whatever you did in Afghanistan after you pulled out, the overflow came onto us. And guys like me had the job then of cleaning up the mess that was passed on to us. So that baggage carries forward. In 1971, when we went into Bangladesh, the 7th Fleet came into the Indian Ocean. So there still is a degree of, to put it very bluntly, a certain amount of distrust from both sides. Not only our side, but equally from the United States side. And we definitely now want to get closer to the United States. We need your technology, we need your assistance. But at the same time, we're not prepared to give up our independence or independent thinking. So you want us to do certain things. We are well aware that you still will continue with Pakistan as a friend, because your lines of logistics pass through there, going up to Afghanistan, and for that matter into Central Asia. It also is just opposite Iran, which will therefore automatically have some impact on relations with it. The Chinese issue also comes up. which also impacts issues. So we've got a lot of work to do to build up trust. With our experience with the Russians and from a little bit of assistance that we did get from the United States, is whenever help came, it came with too many strings attached. And if an equipment came, it came without essential parts. And therefore we were left high and dry when we needed them. So we still have that fear in our mind. And therefore much more contact like this is required to straighten out the past, to straighten out the baggage and get to know each other much better and progress forward, including military to military training, jungle warfare schools, and other exercises and things like that. A lot of military diplomacy is required. And I think given time, we would be able to get over that. I hope I've talked some sense. Yes.
So I guess what if we're going to move forward, you said there's this distrust. What are the baby steps? Because I know there's, from what I hear, and what we've had a conversation on, limited contact with the militaries. When it is a bilateral situation. There's now recently the trilateral with Japan, but for us to work together, we're going to have to work at higher level commands, interoperable between the two militaries. So what are the baby steps to get us working towards the trust, building the trust, bringing in, our two militaries working together?
One was basically that the Americans saw us as a country which is, from the Cold War until now, firmly on the Russian camp. And they, on our face, told us that, look, every time there is a voting in the United Nations, 90% of the time you vote with the Russians against us. So they had a point. On the other hand, the Russians, on the Kashmir issue, which is basically something which, right from partition days, is the bone of contention between us and the distrust that we have between the two countries, that is Pakistan and us. That every time the entire world, as we seem to notice, ganged up with Pakistan against us, it was only the Russian veto which helped us out till date. So therefore, maybe this distrust, like the you were saying, whilst that old adage still holds good, that everybody given a chance would want to go to America and settle down. That's besides the point. But the fact of the matter is that this distrust was there from both sides. You talked about baby steps. I would like you all to realistically now look at the changed political scenario and changed world environment at the moment. Here is a country, and let me not beat around the bush, which is the hub of terror in the world. It is totally radicalized. It is the same DNA as us. They are not Arabs. They are basically Indians who converted to becoming Muslims for whatever reasons. So therefore they are not looking west, they are looking east. And I do not know for whatever reasons they finally are not able to sort of identify themselves as a nation which broke apart for being a Muslim nation, which they aren't, to be very frank. Balochistan, Sindh, they are all, sort of at loggerheads with each other. The Muhajirs, the people who went over from here and settled there, are also looked at as a separate entity. And here is a country which, for itself, has not found its identity, to be very frank. Best of intellectual minds will tell you that the Pakistanis are not too sure what is their eventual identity. Are they going to be pure, radical, Wahhabi kind of Muslims? Or are they going to be secular Muslims or whatever? Ours is the second largest Muslim population in the world. But the Indian Muslim is somehow totally different to what the Pakistani Muslim is. Here is a nation which had Osama bin Laden in a cantonment for 12 years And I do not know, I can't say the Americans were gullible enough to believe with an official statement coming out that the parties, the authorities, that we didn't know that Osama bin Laden was there. Now that's Pakistan's view. So I think we want a good neighbor. We know that the Americans have a voice which can make them understand and see reason. It cannot be that we will stop terrorism for everybody else except for the Indians. It cannot be that way. The blast in St. Petersburg yesterday showed me that, I mean, the world over, it's there. So therefore, the baby steps that I'm talking about, why can't there be, seemingly at least, some noises are coming out. There was this bill which you all were bringing in the Senate of thinking of making Pakistan, calling Pakistan a nation which yes,
State sponsor.
I don't know where it went. But basically, these are things which you see, you have to rattle them. They will not understand otherwise. And mind you, they play a masterly game. Here's a nation which has China and Americans as friends. And even before Nixon. So you've got to give it to them. They are diplomats absolutely, I think they have it in them to sort of bridge the gap between two opposing poles altogether and still straddle the space in between. And yet they have sort of changed. We find it difficult. It is not, I mean, let me put it in a very candid manner. It is not being conceited. Pakistan is not a military force, except for the nukes we keep talking about, which rattles us by any chance. We in the armed forces have seen them, and it isn't much of a game to sort of, if it was a confrontation of that nature, which we do not do. So therefore, who do we look up to at this moment? To be very frank, the Americans. And therefore, they will listen if the voices from America come out. These are the baby steps which we think that they could not and should not do what they are doing in Kashmir and other places.
And if the United States feels it is in the United States national interest.
Yes, true.
But see, one thing which, sorry for the thing. I think we must take back a message to the people. Because it doesn't apply to Pakistan only. It applies to Pakistan, it applies to Iran, it applies to Syria, it applies to the entire ambit of the Middle East, where you've got Islamic fundamentalism at its peak. Right? Islamic fundamentalism doesn't get built up in a day. It takes a good 15 to 20 years of total indoctrination to create a fundamentalist. Now you have a major role to play as the leading power in the world to try and undo that by soft measures, to undo the fundamentalism. And that has to come through concentration on education in those countries, concentration on their teaching systems and the madrasas, and so on and so forth, to undo what has been done.
So we look at the diplomatic instrument, the information instrument, the military instrument, the economic instrument. The reason this interaction for me is so gratifying is because anything that we come up with in terms of a strategy that the U.S. should adopt, tie all this together for India, is meaningless unless it takes into consideration your interests and your strategy, the way you see the United States. So that's why I find this particularly gratifying. And I guess my question to you, before I can answer sort of your question about what it is that we would expect or what we would hope for India, I think the answer to that is there are some logical lines. You're going to hear any one of us talk about how wonderful it would be to have a stable regional hegemon in India that helps balance the peaceful rise of China, counterweight in the region, economic interests, energy, there's a whole host of things, freedom of the seas. But I guess my question to you is, what are the strategic challenges that you face in your own system? I've given you a little bit of a taste of what ours are. The fact is that very often we have trouble connecting the dots in the interagency community, and we don't often have time when we have our day-to-day meetings to take a step back and think strategically. It's often very tactical. So I was wondering if you feel that same, you suffer from that same disease as we do, I guess, and what systemic issues we might address in our own systems, yours and ours, to actually build a strategy together.
So, from one stage to another stage, there has been a paradigm shift in the outlook. World War I was an outcome of what is known as nationalism. It was at the peak, so that nation world emerged from that, and the world paid its price. We have all the statistics with us, how many people died in World War I, and what was the end result, that there was no one left to die further. So the people decided to call it off. Even in the last stage, even US took part in it. Okay, for whatever reasons, though it was a fight in the Europe only. Then this nationalism was further strengthened by rise of Hitler. Okay, after the Treaty of Versailles, where he felt the national pride of Germany was hurt. So it was again peak, so Nazism came. Okay, and world has seen the results. Then an era of Cold War started. So it was a bipolar world, but the current was very strong underneath. So people aligned themselves for securing their own self. You had NATO, you had Warsaw coming in, all the pacts and alignments came in. It was to safeguard yourself. So we broke into that. But after the Cold War, World War, when USSR were disseminated, the monopolar world came, where the United States of America was the leading power. Now what is expected of a monopolar world? There's somebody who is the guardian to keep everything in order. The world, the way it is supposed to be, because you possess everything and you want to be the monopolar and the guardian of the world. So obviously, okay, but now somebody who did not like it will change the power center. So somebody tried to balance it off. That no, monopolar is no good for the balance. So let's have a bipolar. So again, all those strategies what we are talking, where are we? What are we looking at? What is India looking at? Okay. Now for a developing country or an underdeveloped country, what is more important is the development of the country for the masses. That basic, because that is the main issue, which is a daily struggle. Your entire politics of a country is based on those issues. The politics of India is not based on what relation India is going to have with USA. The politics of the country is based on fundamental issues because they are very pertinent. Whether we are able to achieve it or not is a different issue, but that is an issue, all right. So what strategy can India do? So taking from what General Mukherjee or Brigadier Mukherjee has said, now what is coming in our way of our development is the terrorism which we are facing day in and day out. Most of our time, most of our division, most of our thing is going there, which is shaking the whole thing. It is not one big 9/11 sort of an incident, okay, which made a huge bang the world over, but it is on a daily basis. So if you see the statistics, it is incredible. So USA realized terrorism after 9/11. India is facing terrorism from 89, fundamentalism you call it, or whatever you call it. I'm not talking about the insurgency in the northeast. We are not placing insurgency in the northeast at all in the bracket of terrorism. So there are negotiations, they are talking, but now whom do we talk? Because this is a total terrorism which is very, very religious. And India is a big target. India is a big target. No other country is as big a target as India. So when we talk about what General Mukherjee said, that we have to sort out the baggages of the past, there are very many right from 1950 onwards, ever since 62 operations. But what we say, ki if USA thinks that it is the monopolar guardian of the world, then does it realize ki what ails India as a country, as a sovereign republic country? So if it realizes, probably there lies the key to remove all the baggages. Because everything can be, nothing can be forgotten, but everything can be forgiven. When you want to look a way ahead, nobody will forget what has happened, but that will not be a bone of contention anymore in the future. So that is what I personally feel, that what is the commonality? What is the commonality and how does USA? And somebody said, General Roy said no politics, but I am forced to make a statement because your president himself said that I am not president of the world, I am president of India. I will do what is good for America first. What does it mean? How does the world read his statement? How does the world read his statement? Now what is happening in African continent? America has got nothing to do with it. America has got nothing to do with it. UN is doing all that is required to be done. But there are some places where America is doing directly, UN is nowhere. So I do not know what sort of a messaging America is doing to the world over. So is it doubt in our mind or doubt in America's mind? How it perceives itself? So that question you may like to answer.
The current strategic dialogue, the current ones, it emerged from somewhere around 2000, when it was decided that there'll be this high-level meeting co-chaired by the Honorable External Affairs Minister and from the US side, from the Secretary of the State. And broadly 5 regions were decided on which they will look at. First is the strategic issues. Second is energy, including clean energy. Third is economy and trade. Fourth is science and technology. And fifth is health and innovation. Now, I'll not go into these because one can read up. A lot of things have happened in these fields, some less, some more, and so on. But what I would like to say in this forum is that we have to take into view what's the current scenario and what's happening under the leadership of both the US and the dynamic leadership of our country. And I feel that we have to look where are the areas of convergence, and only then we can talk. You see, because unless it interests both, nothing will happen. So you have to look where is the convergence. So I would like to say some areas of convergence which can be thought about. First is the Asia Pacific and the Indian Ocean region. It's a total area of convergence between the rebalanced strategy that US is following and ours look east and act east policy. It's a total convergence. And in this region, as we understand, Asia Pacific as also in the Indian Ocean region, unless USA and India and also some other countries get together, the issues in this region cannot be resolved. So you got to, and I'm sure things are happening, but I'm just saying this is one area of total convergence. Second area I'd like to highlight is of cyber security and cyber infrastructure. As we understand, the US and India, we are one of the highest internet users. But what I would request and what I think needs to be done by the US to help India is to put India on the high table of decision making process of cyber security. That is most important. Because in last year under the UN there was a group of governance experts, GGE, in which they took 20 countries who will decide on the cyber infrastructure and so on. In that India was not included. And we are the second or the third largest internet users of the world. And how can that be? And I'm sure we all very well understand that how important cyber security is. And as has been stated that, even the US presidential elections were also tampered with. So there could be nothing more dangerous. And we got to find together laws, because today if there is any cyber breach and it points out to anywhere in the world, you have no law to do anything to anybody. And this can't go on. There has to be some sort of a policy and a law internationally in place, which it has to be led by the US and India. And this is where there is a great amount of convergence is there. Third is the people-to-people contact. We are all aware of the issues of H1B visa which is going on. Well, that could be left to the firms, both US and Indian firms, to sort of look at, and I don't know how much the government will get into it. But what I would like to say is that skilled manpower, highly skilled manpower exchange must continue. Both countries will lose if this doesn't happen. Skilled manpower exchange is extremely important. Fourthly is of defense cooperation, of which it has been already discussed. But the way things are happening must happen. Only thing I would like to state here is that the policies currently which have been enunciated under the present administration, US administration, should not hamper the defense production in India which has been planned to be executed and under the Make in India projects. Because if that happens, then it would not be fair. And lastly, I would like to, in exchange program, I would like to recommend that we must have some youth exchange programs. I have seen in an organization in which I was there earlier, and in which we used to have youth exchange program with various countries, friendly foreign countries. And I have seen the impact of this program on the impressionable ages of college going 18 to 20, 24 years, that impression stays. I have seen a lot of people who have grown up and doing well in their respective fields, but this part of what they saw and what they experienced when they were in that age always stays. And as we are bound to grow together in whatever way, in being the two largest democracies, this part of targeting some part of the youth must happen. Thank you.
Let me give a voice from a civilian in a predominantly military get-together. Colonel Medda doesn't understand the stand of the President Trump that why America first. But I think in the democracy, the first nation is national interest first. Having said that, I see very clearly there are signals from the American side as far as to end the agitation of the history about which General Mukherjee mentioned. I find there is a change and there is an attempt to end this agitation of the history. I think one of the greatest success of the Obama administration has been the Indo-US relationship. The challenge is now to continue with that enthusiasm. Whether this administration will continue with that or not is a major issue. I think decision of the United States during the Obama administration to make India as a major defense partner has been a game changer, bringing India almost equal to the American allies as far as the technology and the equipments are concerned. We have also seen that in this era of total polarization of American politics, what we find that the issue of the Indo-US relations, they get equal support from both the sides, from the Democrats and the Republicans, which is also a very, very important thing. What can you see as far as these? It was whether it is a bipolar world or a unipolar world and a world which is leading towards a multipolar world. The national interest will always remain paramount. America will be anywhere and everywhere depending on their national interest. And this we should understand very clearly. But there's the compelling reasons or the grounds for this Indo-US relation can be the mutual interest in the stability of the Indo-Pacific region. That can be one of the very compelling mutual interest. Similarly, about the issue which General Roy also mentioned, Colonel Bedya also mentioned, is the shared concern about the terrorism in South and Central Asia, which is not only important for us or for America, important for the world as a whole. And I think third issue can be the economic opportunity, which both India and America offers to each other. So that can also be another very important reason. And in addition to the democratic values, which to the great democratic countries they share, I think these are the important factors which can push the relationship between India and America. Thank you.
I think one of the most important things to my mind is that Indo-American relation should be more strengthened. As has been mentioned, we sometimes feel that, I don't know for what reason, Pakistan becomes a favored country. You see, as everybody has said, the birth of terrorism is mostly from Pakistan. Today, not only America, not India, Europe is suffering from it. And if you see, most of them are born from Pakistan. So I think, not that any one of us, there are good neighbors, some of us have visited Pakistan, and the people are very nice, but somehow this thing has gone in. And I think Americans play a good role in trying to make them understand that they must genuinely believe in avoiding such things which can cause damage. Their economy is in bad shape. The country is suffering from many other problems. And we as neighbors, we want to have a healthy neighbor there. But obviously, and there are certain problems concerning Kashmir. Now, many people don't realize this. Rightly one point, India is the second largest country which has Muslims. And just because the Muslims are in Kashmir expecting us to give it up is something which is not good, because that will have a total impact on our country. So I think, and of course, military collaboration is very essential, and we can benefit from your technology, and not to benefit by invading any country. We have proved to the world, 1971, we have proved to the world that India has no intention. Otherwise, Bangladesh, was fought by Indians, but they handed over to Bangladesh people because that was how they wanted it.
Thank you again for hosting us, taking time out of your busy schedules to spend time with us, students who are, we've been studying India for the past year. We can read about it in books, we can watch programs on television, hear people come into the classroom and give us lectures, but until we come to the land and meet the people on their home turf, if you will, and hear their perspective, you really don't have a good appreciation. And so thank you for your candor and your perspective. And so I think, as I was talking to over the meal with Mr. Bandari, we're talking about the largest democracy and the youngest democracy. I mean, why wouldn't we be friends, partners, and work together? And I think what has helped me gain a greater appreciation is you have to take, as you're working through your strategies, global strategies, you have to take into consideration what is most pressing from your friends and partners, and to hear that terrorism and then infrastructure concerns there. And so that is absolutely important. And what I'd like to, we're a nation that is struggling right now. We talked about a divided electorate. So our domestic context is important. When you ask the average American on the street, they have nothing but positive comments about India. Certainly in our field as Department of Defense or Department of State, nothing but positive comments about India and opportunities and how we can move forward. Also understanding historical baggage. We've heard from a few Indians from other parts of the country who, when we have asked what can the U.S. do, and not necessarily just as transactional in nature, but what can we do to move the friendship forward? Where can we help? And we've heard defense cooperation. We've heard, and there's been great movement over the past 8 years. Several of them have, and we recognize it's only one perspective. But we've heard the U.S. can do nothing for us. India has to manage this itself. And that's a little disheartening. But I'm going to ask, where do you see opportunities for the U.S. With no strings attached, or where we may be able to help partner with, to help India with its infrastructure, and then also the terrorism piece I understand, but really looking at the infrastructure, what kind of opportunities Maybe it's for, foreign investment, but where can we help? Where do you see we may be able to help with infrastructure projects?
I guess one of the challenges that or at least the hesitation I'm feeling on this side, and there may be some of my fellow students are as well, is of course we've been in the academic environment since last summer, and a lot of the questions, the underlying current, a lot of the questions are, what is the new Trump administration going to do? And of course we're outside that right now. We're in this artificial academic environment, so we don't have any insight specifically into what the administration's working on. So it's frustrating for us to try to think of how to answer that because there's some very good questions there, and unfortunately, I don't have the answers to that. I do agree that it's come up multiple times where certainly both countries have interests, and we need to figure out, each country's going to look after its interests, and let's look at where the interests converge. So, from my perspective, again, as someone who's probably in about the middle, if you will, of the chain there, I take a very simple, maybe too simple look on potential solutions. I look to, at a point in the future where our interests may converge, how can we make sure that when that convergence happens, we're able to work together effectively and efficiently and not having to start from the beginning? And I believe some of the examples we've heard that certainly in the naval domain, the maritime domain, there is a lot of interaction there. I believe there's some as well within the Air Force. I don't think as much within the Army, but how can we improve that so that when we do decide that there is something common that we can both agree on, that we can smoothly go and respond to that and operate on that. I don't think that the U.S. would ever expect, my own personal opinion, that that really any ally would be completely in step with everything we want. And we've seen that in the past. That doesn't happen, and life still goes on. We still, we're still allies. So I'm trying to figure out what are the steps we can take to start. What are some concrete steps we can take to make sure that we can do these operations together, in some, like I said, some of the other domains.
The way I understand it is this, that the Trump administration is actually looking at the subcontinent to be a soft option in terms of unraveling its foreign policy. That's one aspect of it. The other aspect is I do not actually see anything coming out of the Sino-US summit that's happening right now, beyond basically North Korea. The third point is Putin. I mean, why I'm saying that the Indian subcontinent aspect is important for the unraveling of the, or rather revealing the United States foreign policy under President Trump. The third point is Putin, Russia. Now, with Russia, the problem is you finally have a talking point under the circumstances that exist in the United States about Russia. The talking point will be terrorism, nothing beyond that again. So if you are investing so much on the Indian subcontinent by the Trump administration, there are two things that has to happen. One is that historically we have had this idea that the State Department has been friendly has been more receptive to Indian ideas, while the Pentagon wasn't. And that has changed, of course. That has changed over time. Now, if somebody talks about Obama administration having the best set of policies on India, that is absolutely correct, sir. The only point is, you look, the way I see it again, is that you look at the commercial angle of the relationship to pan out first. You want us to buy American equipment, and at a commercial level, Of course, your companies do not want to compete in India. Your defense and industrial sector do not want to compete in India with the other organizations that exist, the commercial organizations. And you like the congressional path and the, what do you call it, I've forgotten the term. जैसे अभी अपना मुने अच्छे कि बोले होता वही the congressional clearance and then the Department of Defense.
But
FMS, yes, foreign military sales. Foreign military sales. I mean, you'd rather have foreign military sales with us and not commercially, compete with other organizations of various nations. But that's okay with us, provided it does not impinge on our interests with other countries.
But give some examples of this.
FMS?
Yeah, no, they don't want to compete and they will.
Oh, yeah, sure. I have attended conferences in Delhi where people are from Lockheed Martin, from Boeing, have said that we would rather have the FMS route. I know why they're speaking it. That's a different point. I don't want to talk about it. They do not want to go through a cumbersome, procurement process of the Ministry of Defense.
I don't think that is a problem in the US. It's a problem with us. We wanted.
No, it's equally the problem in the US.
I've been involved in many
I'm sure.
heavy-duty
I'm sure.
projects, very recent ones.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason which you said is right. We would rather, to hasten the process, like to fall into the FMS category rather than. But it is not that they are not willing to compete with us.
You see, I'll tell you what, the DoD procurement process, the little that I know of it, is equally or more cumbersome for the US Armed Forces as well. I mean, they know how to go about this business.
I think we can discuss this.
This later, yeah, over coffee. Okay, now the point is, the real point is, we do not see a land-based close interaction with the US Army. What we see is a naval cooperation in terms of the Indian maritime policy as it has been enunciated. And you have to keep in mind that we are soon going to have two CBGs over the two seas across India. And there's a different point that has also come in, which is the development of Gwadar is actually, this is a point that I've read somewhere, is actually to bypass the Malacca Strait choke point and move through, pardon me?
No, I thought you were going to talk about the canal.
No, I'm talking about the OBOR being connected to Gwadar and then bypass Malacca Straits and go to China.
Right.
What happens is the delivery point becomes Gwadar. From Gwadar you connect on the OBOR and go to China. So that is a strategic challenge for us, for the Indian armed forces. Now the United States has to look into it fairly carefully, I guess. The cybersecurity aspect is extremely important. I mean, you've moved up. You're moving out of the ICANN system, the way I understand it yourself. If you're moving out of the ICANN system, and if you're going for a multilateral international, or rather an internationalist body, which apparently the United States is finally thinking of, India has to be a part. I mean, there cannot be but India being a part of the international, structure. Well, this too, and beyond that, the only point that we would like to make is that, you see, you have a deal maker supposedly in Washington. Now, this deal maker shouldn't think in terms of a G2 kind of a situation.
What Colonel Hopper was saying, to get back to the focus of what you were going to ask about infrastructure. The entire gamut in our country, we have a serious problem of poverty. There are women from the villages who walk miles together to get their pitcher of water for their daily consumption. Now, and all this gamut of discussion with regard to big dams, small dams, it is there for everybody to see. Nobody gets a fair idea of who's correct and who's not. But the technology is there for converting even ocean water into within reasonable costs and commercially owned. As also recharging. This entire technology which the Americans have, and if they could venture into this, is another area which I look at with great interest. The third is healthcare. Although we have made rapid strides in our country in healthcare, and within Asia, I think we are now a powerhouse so far as good healthcare services are concerned. But there is huge areas of concern, huge areas of gain. And lastly, although we are at a nascent stage, but avionics, these are the areas where we would look at in terms of infrastructure technology.
Perhaps I could be a little blunt again. A little bit of crystal gazing.
Put on your mic, sir.
You've got two extreme rightist heads of state in the United States and India. I think they should get on reasonably well together. There are a lot of commonalities between the two. But to come down to brass tacks, whatever it be, if you look at United States national interests, whether India likes it or not, and whether you all accept it or not, the United States is in Afghanistan to stay. I don't see you ever pulling out, at least not in the foreseeable future. You've got Iran on one side, you've got Russia's underbelly on the other, you've got China on the other side, and you've got Pakistan. I don't see you giving up on Pakistan at all, much to our disgust. But that's the truth. So we may as well face that as Indians. But you're not going to get out of that, which means you're going to continue to try and keep them happy also. So from our side, our request to you would be, is try and get them to see reason. And therefore, the areas where we would have commonality is entirely in the economic field. Is entirely in the entire gamut of the economic field. In terms of American investment, American technology, that would improve relations tremendously. And in the other fields, the military to military fields, it's just much, much more of interaction, understanding, building up over a period of time. And the strategic technology field, where I don't think it will impinge on US national interests, would really be in the field of infrastructure, in the field of energy, in the field of healthcare, as they all brought out. All these areas. And techniques of fighting, in terms of military cooperation, techniques of fighting terrorism, techniques of fighting insurgency. I disagree totally that you would give us one iota of information regarding cyber warfare or cyber security. I don't think you'd help us at all. But that's my view. So that, broadly speaking, is what I feel. And towards the east, I think there's a lot of scope. Thank you.
I think much has been said, and the initial part perhaps would portray an impression that nothing has moved and nothing has changed. But certainly a lot has moved, a lot has happened, and perhaps in the last 6 to 7 years,
US as being the largest partner in terms of aviation, that is from naval aviation and the Air Force. And that doesn't happen unless there is something intrinsic between the two countries. So baggage is fine, and I think at times it's smarter to look ahead rather than keep looking back and stumbling. I think that's the best policy in the current scenario. But one step which obviously needs to be taken is to intensify sharing of military intelligence. And we must find ways of sharing intelligence at different levels. It shouldn't happen that, just the defense attaché coming into the deputy chief's office and saying, sir, I have heard so and so and so. So it has to be more systematized. Because intelligence sharing is going to be the crux of all issues in the future. Credible intelligence, actionable and whatever. These are the terminologies used. So one way of building trust is INT, as far as we are concerned. I don't have to say much because in terms of the Navy, I think we are progressing pretty well. One has had the opportunities of attending 2 ESGs, which we have with the 7th Fleet, and with Admiral Scott. And I think now he's a PACOM, if I'm not mistaken. He's become a 4-star. He's PAC Fleet. So I think a little more weightage has to be given to the Army. I think there the cooperation is lacking behind, and perhaps also giving an impression to the largest service in the country that all is not so close. Where in the Navy we don't have that impression because we are interacting much more frequently and the interaction is more intensive. So I don't have to say anything further.
Anything from this side? I guess,
If I may, and again, thank you for bringing up such fantastic points. I can speak for my colleagues that I know that we've all taken some significant notes, and it will help our strategy projects tremendously with the comments that you made. I'd like to go back to the comments that were made on national interests and intelligence sharing. We've been talking about the foundational documents. I'm sure you're aware of LAMOA, DACA, the COMCASA documents and agreements that have been progressing over the course of a number of years. And in discussing these in our trip previously, we were told that signing these documents weren't in the national interests of India. I would be curious to understand exactly why that isn't. After the comments about intelligence sharing, agree personally that that would be an area that we could expand upon. Why would signing such a document or an agreement be not in India's interests?
Well, that puts me to this question. He was talking about connecting dots. So if you see the famous serial House of Cards, well, it's all pervasive, whether it's United States, whether it's India or any other country. So you got to take this not with a pinch of salt, but with a lump of salt. So I put it at that.
Okay.
It's good that we have Mark from the US Department of State. How do you react to the statement made by the first Indian American US ambassador to the UN that America can mediate between India and Pakistan? And it has come to us in the initial days of President Trump. That doesn't indicate any change in the policy, American policy. And I'd also like to know that India will not mind the developing of the close relation between President Trump and Putin. After that, India will be able to manage without any contradiction. And we feel that it will also reduce the dependence of America, Russia, and China. But what is your views on this? US, India and China, this trilateral relationship. What do you have to say about that?
Well, thank you for the question, sir. I think from a diplomat, you won't be surprised to get a diplomatic answer. I'm certainly not going to speak for Ambassador Haley. I think that what we've seen in the course of our studies over the decades is various ebbs and flows in the wishful thinking on the part of American policymakers that the Kashmir situation can somehow go away and it can be resolved. And I think we've seen a pattern that at various times policymakers have felt, okay, well now's the moment we should engage, and somehow there's an opportunity, perhaps we can mediate and be of some help. And I think there are good intentions behind that. And in other moments, of course, there's a realization that this is fundamentally not our issue to resolve, and less of an effort is made to engage. So that's what I would limit my impression to on that side. And your question about China is, and I would add Russia to that equation, is a very good one, and is in fact the one that I alluded to earlier, that most of our strategies tend to they tend to be based on the same assumption, that a secure, prosperous, developing, strong India as a partner for the United States is critical in managing, I don't want to use the word containment because I don't think that's what it is at all, in managing the peaceful rise of, and let's say the constructive rise of China. So that's sort of an assumption that runs throughout all of our thinking, and certainly a lot of the speakers that we've had and a lot of the input that we've had over the course of this year. The Russia situation gets a little bit more complicated, as you can see. We read the daily headlines with as much interest as you do. And I think there is certainly a desire on Putin to reestablish Russia's role as a great power. And I think what we're looking at now is not perhaps right now, but 5, 10, 20 years from now, what does the great power picture look like? I certainly hope we're not going back to the World War I equation that your colleague alluded to earlier, quite rightly. I think hopefully we can avoid that. But that game, we've had some discussions on this trip so far about surrounding the question of, is India now a great power? Does India see itself as a great power? What will it take for India to become a great power? And that's fascinating because I think in any country, as you talk about connecting the dots, I would put it this way. I would speak less of a bipolar world or a unipolar world. I would speak perhaps of bipolar countries in a unipolar or bipolar world. Because it's not clear from the speakers that we've heard from before today that India has decided, or that it is possible for India to come to a clear decision on what it wants to be and what it takes to be a great power. We had one speaker say, well, some would say India already is a great power. And another said exactly what you said, sir. How can India be a great power when you have hundreds of millions of people living on less than $1 a day? We have the same bipolarity within our own system, so we're struggling with this right now. And some of the willingness to engage positively and constructively with Russia, I saw this at the National Security Council. Under the previous administration, you had some who believed that we could turn over a new leaf with the Russians and cooperate on Syria and in other areas. And you had the Cold Warriors who were still there. It said, that's the same mentality, it's the same system, it's the same cast of characters. We can't really fundamentally trust them. We have to base this more on sort of tactical or transactional cooperation. Look where our interests overlap. So it's a long way to answer your question, but I hope I did so.
Thank you.
Harsh, can we have you?
1 second, I must clarify one issue. You must take it back very clear. Even if we handed over the whole of Kashmir to Pakistan on a platter, you're not solving the problem between India and Pakistan. Let's be very clear on that. It is not Kashmir. It's much, much deeper than that. It's partition and the hatred and feeling that exists right till today on all issues, not only Kashmir. Let's be very clear. Thank you.
On both sides of the equation.
Yeah, on both sides.
Yeah, Harsh.
Well, I thank Martin for his very insightful comments. I mean, during our discussions in the last hour or so, we've shown our analogies to the whole world. We've shown our analogies to the world. I was in New York City a couple of months ago at a conference, and I was sitting next to my friend Jim Woolsey, who used to head the CIA earlier. I know him from my days at Yale. He went to Yale too. And we used to have many sessions at Yale with people from West Point getting together. But one of the things he mentioned at the conference was a very multipolar world, unipolar, bipolar, multipolar world that we live in. And you drew an analogy that the world that we live in today looks very similar to the 1930s. There's a global recession. People are not doing well economically. There's rise of new powers internationally, more and more multipolarization. People are looking inwards. Globalization is sort of receding into the background. And he said, history may not repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme. And he says, the times we live in now reminds me of the 1930s, what happened right after that, World War II. So that's the only analogy that was pending. And the more I read and look at news reports on what's happening, especially in the South China Sea, the aggressive stance being taken as far as building up of military capability, as far as creating camps of people either with China or against China. It's very similar. Again, the Cold War analogy. Every newspaper report every year compares budget spendings. What percentage of your GDP are you spending on defense? And China's number compared to the US number, compared to the Indian number, compared to the different camps and how many ships they have, how many airplanes they have, all of that stuff. And that worries me. And I would love to hear, from your academic perspective, about what's a way to think about this and what's a way to address this. Is it simply wait and watch and let time give an answer, or something should be done a little bit more actively? I would love to hear some views.
Well, that is our grand strategist who has spoken.
So, that's obviously a very difficult question. So I think in terms of the South China Sea, which is, you're asking about that specifically, I don't think anyone wants a confrontation in the South China Sea. It's not in anybody's interest. So there is certainly not a desire to push us into a conflict. Certainly the risk of that increases as more and more gets put in there. I don't know. I don't know if I really have a good answer to that one. I think there's certainly a desire to. It's such a critical area for not only the United States but really the whole global economy. So there's more than just U.S. interest in that region, and the United States certainly has the desire and the interest to keep the straits open. So it will probably go on a lot along the ways it is now, where both sides will probably continue to build up in the area, and hopefully it doesn't escalate out of control. I don't really have a better answer than that right now. I don't know if anyone else does.
Lieutenant Colonel, if I could just tag into what Colonel Anderson is mentioning. So first, since I see a camera here, I have to caveat with the views expressed are mine only and not the official stance of the U.S. government. I'll also caveat that if you're looking for a discussion or a relaying of information back to the heads of state or the president, I've not yet received a response on my lunch invitation for next week. So at this point, that's probably echelons above my pay grade to discuss that. I'm happy to discuss my interpretation of what I've talked about in class and learned in the last year, and what I think for my strategy, what I think our interests are, and where that overlaps. And you'll have to pardon, I've learned a lot in the last year. I was born in 1974, so some of those issues were before I was born, and I'm still kind of getting up to speed on some of those. But to tag on to what he said, we did this interesting exercise where we had to talk about the Thucydides trap and whether that was an inevitability or not. And we had to argue both sides. I thought that
What trap?
Thucydides. Yeah. So essentially, whether a rising power and an established power, whether that will automatically result or inevitably result in a power conflict. And there was a great study that talked about 10 of the 15, I think it's 10 of the 15 previous times in history it resulted in war. And then we went and argued about, hey, there are many reasons why that model may or may not apply. So I think it strikes to a little bit of whether that question happens. So another thing, we've heard the same thing, that's looking closer to World War I, maybe a lot of similarities in history doesn't repeat itself, and yes, it may rhyme, but you also have to take the right lessons from history. There's a tendency to want to apply that linearly. So what I would tell you from Lieutenant Colonel Bob Payne's perspective, I appreciate the comments. I do believe, looking at the U.S.-India relations, very cautiously optimistic. Things have gone well. There may have been some tensions in the past. I think we've talked about we pursue our own interests, and those interests now align, are getting more in alignment than they ever have. And I think we have to take a long-term view of that. So the way I've written my strategy, I looked at, and I took, I won't mention the name, but I took a prominent scholar to echo what Mark talked about, great power, ambition, and the comments, this analyst's perspective of India, were the great power and ambition depended on India's ability to achieve multidimensional success in terms of improving its economic performance and wider regional integration, acquiring effective military capabilities for power projection, coupled with wise policies for their use, and sustaining its democracy successfully for accommodating the diverse ambitions of its people. So from my perspective, I looked at it and said the obvious area from my perspective was security cooperation, military assistance seemed to be, certainly within the next decade, something that we are already doing and should be able to expand upon. The other issues of infrastructure, energy, and healthcare, and clean energy, and those are all absolutely, we think there's some great interest there. I think we're probably taking a longer term view, 2 to 3 decades. We do have a little bit of a national debt problem right now, so we don't have an unlimited checkbook. And when we look at it, I'm not so sure, from what I've heard this week, that on your side that we're ready to capitalize on that either. There's some issues with governance. There's issues that we would have to deal state to state versus a single point of contact or single entity. So I think that's going to take some time on both of our sides to work that. It's a new administration. Anytime you have a new administration, we're still trying to figure out what their priorities are. He still has a legislature to deal with as well. So, but I think in 2 to 3 decades out, I think that's very much a possibility. So physical security, I think terrorism being certainly a part of that. Economic prosperity you mentioned, and regional stability. So the Indian Ocean region, that regional stability, China's obviously the big power broker as well in the region. And then how do we maybe engage with the other littoral states? So that's kind of what I saw where our interests were. On the short term, made sense from a security standpoint. and the others I thought were longer term. And I'd just be curious if you agree with that assessment or not. Thank you.
Is there somebody amongst the team who can speak to us something about Daesh, ISIS, Syria? Anybody who's done a tour of duty there in that area? No?
Iraq and Afghanistan is my experience.
Anybody has some knowledge on that area?
Well, I've served in Syria and I've served in northern Iraq, and I was part of the extended team that was working on these issues at the White House last year, so I can give it a shot and certainly,
please,
whatever your question is.
Well, we would like to know more as to what is happening and what is likely to happen in the future. Is it spreading or has it been contained?
I would like to have a question on the same subject. Whether America and Russia, they are moving towards the collaboration as far as Syria is concerned.
You use the word colonization, is it?
No.
Collaboration.
Well, with the understanding that this is all under Chatham House rules, and I will speak for myself only.
Except you're being recorded, so. We can stop the recording.
Right, I'm not gonna leave the reservation.
Okay, Chatham House rule. No problem.
But this is not being recorded for public.
It is not for public, it's for our archives.
It's only for us.
And it remains with me.
So we are not recording it.
If you want to take back a copy, you must.
I would say, first of all, on the subject of strategy, the process matters. So when you're talking about fighting against Daesh, Islamic State, how you do it, how you balance your geographic equity holders, your stakeholders within the government, and your functional stakeholders. What I mean is those who work on the Middle East, those who work on Europe, geographics, versus the functional, the counterterrorism side. And I would say that as part of the process, there has to be a balance there. Right? Otherwise, the risk is that it becomes too tactical and too politicized. So no one, I think it's safe to say, wants Daesh to persist and endure. But of course, unless you look at the underlying causes, if it's not Daesh that you're fighting today, it's going to be Daesh 2.0 in 10 years or 20 years, the next incarnation. So what are the root causes? And that's what, I wanted to get up and dance, frankly, when you said people-to-people contact and youth exchanges before. Those are some of the best programs we have. I think personally the Fulbright program, started in 1947, I believe, is the single best diplomatic tool that we have as a country. It confounds people who look at metrics and want to assess the development against extremism, how much progress we've made, because it's hard to measure, right? But you really did put your fingers on it before, so I would personally, if it were up to me, I would triple or quadruple the number of grants that we were able to allocate. So that's certainly part of it. And when you look at the tactical counterterrorism engagement, again, the key word there is tactical, right? If you want to deal with the root causes, when you look at what's happened in Iraq, and when you look at the regime of Bashar al-Assad in Syria before 2011 and after, it's at its core, it's a question of Sunni disenfranchisement. And if there is no solution for that, you will have the same problems again and again. Our work in Nineveh province in northern Iraq, based in Mosul, I spent a year there in 2009 to 2010, was based on trying to create the perception of a level playing field among the actors on the ground. So we were very comfortable and accustomed to dealing with Kurdish minorities or Christian minorities or Turkoman and others in more stable parts of the province, people who were used to dealing with us, but the problems were coming in the southern parts of the province, in the Sunni areas, which is where the smuggling, the weapons, the human trafficking was coming in to Iraq. And that blew up, of course, less than 2 years later. So we tried to create that, to flip it upside down and create a balanced perception so that in the eyes of a Sunni Arab in Western Iraq, the gains of one group, of one minority, would not be perceived as a loss to them, right? And this takes time. And there's a great scene in Lawrence of Arabia where everyone's sitting around a table and they're shouting, and to an outsider not used to the region, it looks like a complete failure. But that's the process that you have to go through. Actually, that's part of the successful process when you're dealing village by village and community by community in that part of the world. So it's a long way again to answer your question, but I hope I have. And I think that the process that you use to approach the problem within the interagency community, whether it's the United States, whether it's India, or connecting the dots in any interagency in the world, is critical, because bad process tends to produce bad results.
Okay.
That we would like your opinion on. I, as a kind of a writer, I mean, kind of a writer means one can write, which is why I want to borrow your thoughts. Now the point is, Afghanistan for one. Afghanistan, the Indian Army, in the mid phase of the conflict that was going on. That's still going on, rather, the Taliban movement into Afghanistan. I believe they have 40% of the country, or the 50%, whatever it may be. Now, the Indian Army wanted a broader role in Afghanistan, which was security related. You guys, that is the US, the Department of Defense, did not want the Indian Army to play that role. That's one question, why? Question two is, the way I see it, Jamshad, is that the Kashmir problem actually may get sorted out through the Chinese portfolio, So from that aspect, if we join the CPEC, how would you react?
Pinaki, is that the author speaking in you, or the writer? Right. I think we got most of the answers. Now I'll request Captain Knott, the leader of the team.
Yeah. So gentlemen, we really do appreciate the hospitality you've shown us today. We also really appreciate the spirited discussion. As we talked earlier today, there's one thing to be studying things from our school back in America, but to hear it firsthand and to hear the passion behind it is something that you just can't capture reading a book, and we truly appreciate that. I know I've taken a booklet full of notes over here. I believe a lot of others have as well. This is certainly not a proportional token to what we've received here, but on behalf of the students here from the National War College, we have a coin here in a box, and I guess I'll present to you here, sir, on behalf of the group. I realize this doesn't split multiple ways.
Captain Knott, can we have a few words from you before?
Yeah, just to echo on that, the only thing is, I know we're trying to drag this out of here for our next engagement, but I just want to echo two things. A, I appreciate the frankness of this conversation, because I know that it vastly enriches their academic experience, and it informs their strategies they go forward, which is the most you can hope for, right? Is that it's informed, because there's a lot, as a few of them have said, they've just been living in the academic aspect of the U.S.-India relationship, right? They've been looking at academic. And when you come here, and it's interesting because we try to, and when we come to India, we try to get different viewpoints from inside of India. And you guys actually have been one of the best groups, because you obviously have competing viewpoints within your own group, which is excellent, right? But the good thing about it too for them is the ability to see that India there are a lot of similarities between the U.S. and India, right? More so than most people realize. And certainly when it comes to the internal processes of the two countries, there's a lot, I would say, a tremendous amount of similarity. And so for that, I really want to thank you guys, the whole group, for helping inform them and really, and I would say, I would argue, enlighten them to the way to the insights of India and its governance. So, because I don't think they get that from just reading the academics they read, the books they read, and then also they're staying up on current affairs from Times of India and Stand Times and so on. They're just not going to get it all. So thank you all. I appreciate it very much. And thank you, sir, for hosting us. It was great. And hopefully, we don't come to Calcutta every year, but I think that this would be a great argument to come visit with Sinners Cave. I think it was a great experience for the students. So, and I thank you.
All right, gentlemen. As per protocol, the last word remains with me. Besides a common area of convergence, both being large democratic states, we had a number of areas of convergence from all of us involved over here. There are two more you forgot to mention. One is we both compelled the British to go out. But we took their language. That's a start point.
And then maybe
right? Okay.
These guys do not play the British.
Right, no, that is in the
They
light.
don't play cricket, they play...
Now, I asked a query, what does US want from India? Actually, I did not find the answer. But one gets a certain feeling that the US military would like the Indian military to be a little more proactive in areas that they feel that they can be proactive. Somebody talked about Afghanistan just now. Perhaps even go up to Daesh or something in that same area. Issue remains over here. Is the Indian military capable, not intellectually, has it got the wherewithal to be active in South China Sea or in China? The other thing which halts us actually, as you all know, India does not function under any other military, like the US military. It has to be UN, under command of a UN force. So that is the other. Basically, most nations from India want boots on the ground. But it's going to happen, but if it is only with a UN-led force. And we have given a number of peacekeeping forces and all. Now, one of it brought out, I think, Colonel Payne about rising powers and established powers. Excellent point. All through the last 1500 years, there have been 12 flashpoints that the rising power is trying to de-establish an established power, which is now what we are actually seeing in the offing. Half of these flashpoints have led to wars. We start from city-states of Athens and Rome. Come up to Second World War, which Colonel Vaidya talked about, Germany, Britishers, they were the powers then. America joined later. Now you are seeing again the issue happening. Then somebody came out whether are we going to get back to Cold War point. Well, it's a food for thought whether it's going to happen or not. But you see, India and China are two large neighbors. These are perhaps a few things that we've been trying to hear. And two large neighbors, but unequal powers. Two large neighbors have never been able to live peacefully, except for US and Canada. But then Canada lives within 100 kilometers of the border. $100 million worth of trade, following what, every day? I suppose, yes. Well, I did hear the word counterweight, and what did you use the word counterweight? Somebody used the word counterweight against China. Well, perhaps it will come as a natural issue sometime. At the moment, we are still evolving. We really do not. We would like to have a very peaceful progress and development at the moment, and see what is there for the future. And I hope Gentlemen, you have had a very good trip and all your queries are answered. A cup of coffee laid outside. Thank you very much. The President wants to say something.
There are some people who have made this whole thing, example, Roud and Pradeep Vaidya, who really worked hard to make it.
Oh, thank you.